President Donald Trump appears to have done a U-turn over banning Chinese telecoms manufacturer ZTE from obtaining U.S. parts, just as the Chinese negotiators has arrived in the U.S. for talks. Why this 11th hour change of mind by Trump? And with the much-anticipated meeting between Donald Trump and the DPRK's Kim Jong-un just weeks away, an Italian investigative journalist cautions against being too optimistic about the DPRK leader's motives. I'll be asking her why. Welcome to The Point. I'm Liu He. The U.S. is holding a public hearing on the Trump administration's proposed tariffs on $50 billion worth of Chinese goods starting from May the 15th to May the 17th. About 130 companies and industry groups have so far signed up to share their views about the impact of the planned tariffs. Meanwhile, China and the U.S. are entering a second round of high-level trade talks. Chinese President Xi Jinping's special envoy Liu He is now in Washington for 5 days of talks with his U.S. counterpart Stephen Mnuchin. Confirmation of Liu's visit came soon after an announcement by Donald Trump that he was working with Chinese President Xi Jinping to help get Chinese telecoms company ZTE back into business. The Trump administration in April banned U.S. companies from selling parts to ZTE for violating a previous settlement over illegal shipments to Iran. But at the weekend, Trump made an about-face on ZTE, giving as his reason that too many jobs in China would be lost. So why is Trump throwing this curveball? How is the public hearing going to shape the final list of tariffs, if any, to be presented for Trump's activation? And will Mr. Liu He's visit turn things about? I'm joined in the studio by John Milligan-White, Chairman and CEO of White Diamond Investments Limited, and Zhao Hai from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. First of all, how significant is this 301 public hearing, and why do they have to extend it? Didn't they foresee that a lot of people will want to speak there? What, John?
It's part of an attempt. Trump wants to claim that he's done some deal with China that his predecessors couldn't do. So they have selected, using a computer algorithm, 1,300 different products that they propose.
You're not joking when you say computer algorithm.
That comes from the head guy, that comment. And 1,300 different proposed products. Mm-hmm. Well, those products, if you put tariffs on them, are going to have a lot of effects on American companies. So they have a feedback process, and it's scheduled to be 1 day. I imagine it's going to be 3 days now, and then they'll have to digest all of those and other protests they will get from American consumer and corporate interests, and figure out what they could actually ban. Right. And in the process, they start out with extreme demands, and Trump then comes in and claims he's done a deal.
Right. Looking at the procedure, is this just another step in the formalities to be filled, or is it really a significant part of the process which can really help shape the final list?
It's not only an administrative procedure, but also a substantive one. For instance, I mean, on the one hand, the 301 investigation must go through 7 stages, and this is the next to the last. And they have to go through the public hearing so that companies can be heard from the process about their comments. But secondly, the companies, as you mentioned, 130 companies and industrial groups will participate in the hearing. Not only U.S. companies, but also Chinese companies. And also, those U.S. companies are coming from a variety of different fields. You have agricultural companies, retail companies, steel companies, high-tech companies, and also industrial groups. And also there are companies from Chinese side, and also representatives of Chinese companies from U.S. law firms in this process. So I think the representativeness of this hearing will give the whole spectrum of views commenting on the 301 investigation.
Yeah, is it a coincidence that Mr. Liu He, President Xi Jinping's representative in this U.S.-China trade negotiation, Is it a coincidence that he is in the United States starting the second round of so-called trade negotiations at the same time that the public hearing is taking place? Zhao Hai?
Well, my take is not definitely not coincidence, because considering the date from 15th to 19th, it covers the whole range of the public hearing from 15th to 17th plus one extra day. So I think during this time, on the one hand, you have hearings going on, many companies testifying, but then on the other hand, you must have intense negotiations behind the door between the Chinese side and the U.S. side.
Are these two interreacting with each other in any way, John? Would you imagine any connection between these two?
No. Well, yes, in the sense that this is a process they're going through. It's going to basically make it very hard to put tariffs on a lot of things that they've listed. But it's a 60-day sort of process before these supposed tariffs will come into force. And this is a time when China and America, when China reacts to what America would like to accomplish, which is to persuade China not to do the Made in China process.
So basically, the momentum or the show has to go on until China cede grounds to the U.S. demands. But as I mentioned in the leading, a very interesting about turn in the President Trump's standpoint about the ZTE. For instance, on May the 13th, he sent out a tweet saying, President Xi of China and I are working together to give massive Chinese phone company ZTE a way to get back into business, fast. Point. Too many jobs in China lost. Commerce Department has been instructed to get it done. And then, just 11 hours ago, or the second day, ZTE, the large Chinese phone company, buys a big percentage of individual parts from U.S. companies. This is also reflective of the larger trade deal we are negotiating with China and my personal relationship with President Xi. First of all, why was he suddenly showing concern about too many jobs being lost in China?
Well, I can only speculate. I think it's because President Xi might have said to him, well, if you do that to the carefully selected Chinese company you're doing it to, where it will really put the company out of business, then we might do something to stop General Motors from selling cars in China.
As an example?
As an example. Half of General Motors' profits come from China, so General Motors would be out of business. I think that sort of short conversation could lead to, oh my God, and also the other part of it is, I think Trump has some real bad cops in his China advisors. And it's the first time I've heard Trump use the word nice. I think his purpose is simply to reach something that he can claim is a big breakthrough, and so he's being nice.
Zhao Hai, your take, and also the lapse of time that it took him to come up with the second tweet, the one that talks about jobs in the United States, you know, that the Chinese company buys. Why did it take him so long to think about that and present it in his tweets?
I can also speculate. It's not. I don't really understand the time lapse, but for sure he is claiming credits from both sides. On the one hand, I mean, the first tweet must be after the phone call with President Xi, and he's trying to claim credit from the Chinese side, saying, I'm giving you back so many jobs, you should thank me. And also, he's showing his power. He said, I'm going to use executive power to instruct Commerce Department, and to do it through, you know, my basically order. To change Commerce Department's decision. And then on the second part, he's claiming credit from U.S. domestic industries, saying that I'm saving jobs also in the United States. So from this case, he's reversing dramatically the severe punishment against the Chinese company, and the winner out of this whole drama is himself.
Who treats the country as an audience, most according to his...
He causes the problem, and then he solves the problem.
Well, the thing is, the people in his administration must be going crazy. For instance, Wilbur Ross, who was instructed to come up with all of this punishment, and now is asked to turn it about. Is it still likely that he will say, okay, ZTE or the negotiation didn't go well, we're going to put these punitive measures back in place for ZTE?
I think there's no possibility that America will put ZTE out of business globally. So I see this as just a negotiating ploy.
Zhao Hai?
I think too many jobs and lives are on the line. It's not a game. On the Chinese side, there are over probably total 100,000 people's jobs are on the line. On the U.S. side, over 10,000 people's jobs are on the line. So altogether, I think they need to correct this. And also, the two countries are so intertwined in terms of supply chain, and so many other companies' interests are also on the line. So if you go through this process and punish CTE, put it out of business, then what's going to happen to other companies like Huawei and other companies in the U.S. making semiconductors and also integrated in the supply chain with China? And also there are other companies in Korea and Japan. What's going to happen to them? So overall, I think from the very beginning, it's an impossible position to take. However, I think still, Commerce Department will definitely punish ZTE through other means. This is not the end of the story. They're saying that ZTE could come back into business, but they didn't specify how.
Basically, right. I also read about reports about finding other remedies on ZTE. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about some latest statistics of China's import-export and the changes. The first 4 months of China's foreign trade is represented by an overall increase of almost 9%. As part of that, 6% increase in export, and then almost doubling that, almost 12% of imports made by China from other countries. John, how do you look at this kind of trends? Is China really trying to gain trade surplus over other countries? What is China trying to do here?
I think China's just being very successful economically, and the business is coming in and they're accepting it.
Do you think there is a real genuine need from the Chinese part to increase imports from other countries, as is shown by these numbers?
I think I defer to my friend on that one.
I think overall China's economy is more and more dependent on domestic consumption. So the increase of importation is not some questionable result. So I think that's just natural. However, if you look at the number between U.S. and China, that's definitely has been affected by the 301 investigation and in expectation of the future tariffs. That's why there's a sudden jump in import from the U.S., also export to the U.S. That's just taking precautionary measures. I think you're going to see the number probably ease down if the trade war is not going to happen.
Okay, thank you very much. My two guests, John Milligan, White Chairman and CEO of White Diamond Investments Limited, and Zhao Hai from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. You have been watching The Point with me, Li Xin. We'll take a short break, and when I come back, why some people are not convinced that the DPRK leader Kim Jong-un will give up his country's nukes. My interview with Italian author and journalist Loretta Napoleoni. Stay with us. U.S. President Donald Trump is slated to meet with DPRK leader Kim Jong-un on June the 12th in Singapore. Although the DPRK is denying that Trump's maximum pressure policy drove the country to the negotiating table, optimism surrounding the upcoming meeting is high. Kim suggested he would be open to giving up his nuclear weapons program, while Trump's team is reportedly hoping for a Big Bang agreement that would settle the issue for good. Although it is tempting to hope that an end to the decades-old crisis is just a meeting away, one author disagrees. Italian investigative journalist and economist Loretta Napoleoni believes the idea that Kim Jong-un may be convinced at this point to renounce the nuclear dream of his father and grandfather is a fantasy. In her new book, North Korea, the Country We Love to Hate, she paints a different picture of the country from how the Western media has done. Earlier, I talked to Loretta Napoleoni from London and started by asking the motivations that drove her to write the book.
There's too much propaganda in the West, so I set out to do my own research, and that's the result is the book.
And what is the premise of your book, if you can sum up in a few sentences?
Well, the premise of my book is that North Korea has been striving to become a nuclear power since the beginning, because this is the only way to guarantee the safety of the country. So now that in 2017 Kim Jong-un has shown to the world that they are a nuclear power, now they can sit down and negotiate a re-entry into the international community.
And you said at the beginning of the show that you read too much propaganda from the West, basically on both sides, that is either black or white. Now, after conducting your own research, what is your conclusion about what type of country the DPRK really is?
Well, it's not a communist country, a Stalinist country, as the Western media has depicted. It's actually a country which has been built upon a very strong nationalist sentiment. It's a blood dynasty. It's a society which is absolutely based upon the relationship of each family to, the top of the dynasty, which of course, is the Kim family. I do not think that the approach that we had was the correct approach, because we dismiss, to a certain extent, the DPRK as a sort of country that was about to collapse any moment, which of course it didn't happen. It didn't happen with the implosion of the Soviet Union. It didn't happen with the famine at the end of the 1990s. It didn't happen in 2017 when Donald Trump was threatening to attack the country. So I think now we are on a very good ground to find a solution to the tension that has characterized our relationship. I'm talking about the West and the DPRK.
Now, you said we can view the country's government as a religious sect in the book, rather than a totalitarian regime. What do you mean by that? Are you trying to excuse the government?
No, I'm not trying to excuse the government. I'm just explaining that in 1948, Kim Il-sung decided to build the country on principles which are very close to the sort of modern religious sectarian principles. So the Juche, which is, the philosophy, the ideology, but also a sort of faith that the population has towards the leadership, has been created using all traditions. I mean, let's not forget that the Korean Peninsula was ruled by one single dynasty from the 14th centuries until 1919, when it was colonized by the Japanese. So it drew from the history. And this is why I say, absolutely, this is not a communist country. It is a country completely different from all the countries that we actually know. To a certain extent, we could draw parallels with Saudi Arabia. I mean, absolute monarchy. In fact, I do talk in the book, at the beginning of the book, I draw a parallel between the new crown prince of Saudi Arabia and Kim Jong-un. These are the millennial new dictators, leaders who have a completely different approach to politics than we've seen in the 20th century, and we have to come to terms with it.
Why do you think in the Western world and in the Western media people fail to grasp that aspect about the DPRK, that they just don't see the country in the way that you have described? They continuously describe the city, the country as, the way that we have always read on the Western media.
Well, I would say that the Western media also failed 20 years ago, 10 years ago even, to understand China. We tend to look at ourselves as a sort of perfect political system, perfect economic system. I mean, the so-called victory during the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, has reinforced this belief that there is nothing better than what we have produced. Now, we're completely wrong, because history is still moving, and it's moving very fast. So China has modernized without changing its political structure. I think, North Korea, the DPRK, could modernize in a different way than we actually have planned to modernize the rest of the world. I mean, democracy is not necessarily the political system that fits every single country in the world. Now, we got to show this kind of humility if we want to understand the world. Otherwise, we will be left behind. And I think this is a big risk, not only for Western media, but for Western civilization.
Well, you did say in the book that a North Korean attempt at modernization could succeed. On what ground are you saying that?
Well, I think what the DPRK could actually do, and possibly is already planning to do, is a sort of economic cooperation with the South. Let's not forget the peninsula has always been united. I mean, it was a geographical identity, a linguistic identity, an economic identity for 3,000 years. So the unification through economic cooperation, not political unification, of course, but through commerce, could give the impetus which is required to modernize the country. In that, I would say that we're closer to the Chinese model than we are to any other model, especially, the Western capitalist model. Now, if this happens, I would venture to say that within the next 5 to 10 years, the Korean Peninsula will be economically very, very strong, because yes, the resources, yes, the infrastructure coming, from the south. So this cooperation could produce a very strong economy, which possibly could even dwarf the Japanese economy.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the nuclear program, because there is a very central conclusion or observation of yours, which is that it is a fantasy to expect that the Kim family to give up, or for the DPRK to give up their nuclear program. Why do you say that?
Well, because historically, no one single country that actually has achieved the full status of nuclear power has ever denuclearized. So I think that's a first observation. The other observation is that it is very likely that what the DPRK will propose is a nuclear freeze. We do need to have a new protocol in the world related to the nuclear power achieved by countries which are so-called countries that are not allowed. So we're talking about Pakistan, we're talking about India, we're talking about Israel. So the DPRK is not the only country which actually has achieved nuclear status outside the permission of the international community. So I think this would be a great opportunity for a president like Donald Trump to redraw, to a certain extent, this protocol. And if you think what Macron has said in his most recent visit to Washington, he went there, in order to convince Donald Trump not to give up the agreement with the nuclear agreement with Iran. And then, all of a sudden he said, we do need a new structure, we do need a new approach. So that hints to the need to a different kind of protocol. I think, this is a great opportunity, and I think we should support this opportunity instead of continuously, I'm talking about the Western media, instead of continuously criticizing every single step forward, which is taken either by the DPRK or, by the US.
Right. I see. At the upcoming Trump meeting, what do you think are the chances that some kind of consensus can be reached through compromise by both sides or by one side? In your words, the DPRK has perfected the art of deceit, and President Trump has mastered the art of the deal. So which art will prevail?
Well, I think they will make a deal. They both need to make a deal. The world is expecting a deal. So I think Trump possibly will bring home an agreement for a peace treaty with South Korea. I mean, that would be a tremendous victory. I mean, this is the first president of the United States who has achieved, the end of the longest war since the end of World War II. Now, if you think about it, the two countries are technically still at war. So that would be sufficient for Trump to come home and say, I am a great president. And of course, this is needed for the midterm election, which are going to take place in November. Then on the nuclear side, there will be an agreement to carry on the freeze, which is happening at the moment. And then there will be other meetings. I think, Kim Jong-un possibly will try to drag along the negotiation in order to consolidate the economic cooperation with the South. Economic development, modernization, improvement in living standards in the North will strengthen its leadership on a different foot, not any longer on the nuclear issue, because let's not forget, this is a country that since 1948 has been striving to achieve nuclear status.
Okay.
And that is, I think that's the strategy.
Okay, we have about 1 minute left. I really wonder, how did you do research and investigative work for the preparation of this book? Do you talk to witnesses or people who have traveled and worked to the DPRK? Have you been to the DPRK? How did you write this book?
Okay, I worked for a Russian bank in London in the early 80s, so I did actually know quite a lot about the economy of the DPRK in the 1980s. I reactivated some contacts that I had, but most of it I spoke with Western diplomats who actually live in the DPRK, and they passed me information, and they really were an eye-opening about the condition of the economy.
But how do you know what they have told you is truer than what the Western journalists have written about the country?
Well, what most of the diplomats told me, that the Western journalists, arrive in the country, they take them around, they explain what happened, then they go back home and they write something completely different. So I believe them. I believe them also because I am an economist and I have a knowledge of the economy of the DPRK. I also use a lot of information coming from South Korea, South Korean economy, South Korean data from the Central Bank of South Korea. So I did not only use information coming from Western diplomats.
Okay, thank you very much. We have to leave it there. Loretta Napoleoni, an Italian investigative journalist and economist and author of a new book, North Korea, the Country We Love to Hate. Well, in Chinese, we say 事在人为, or to put it another way, the success of anything really depends on how you do it. And in this case, there's nothing to lose and everything to gain by holding these talks and really trying the best to make something positive out of it. Even if nothing substantive actually does come out of this meeting, the two protagonists are actually at least talking, which is a major first step that has been totally elusive for over half a century. That in itself could be regarded as progress, I guess. And that is it for this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. As always, follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with Alex. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.